Well, hi everyone, and welcome to Dementia Chats. My name is Lori La Bey, and I am a daughter of a mother who lived with dementia for 30 years. And I'm here to facilitate the conversation of our true experts. Those are people living with dementia. And today, our topic, we're going to be talking about getting diagnosed and a change of diagnosis, or when people end up having a mixed diagnosis. What does that mean? How does it make them feel? What do they tell people? How do they accept it and process it? And I think you're going to find it really fascinating. But before we get started on the topic, I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves. And Harry, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Hey, my name is Harry Urban. I live in Pennsylvania. I was diagnosed 16 years ago with Alzheimer's, but now I'm showing more signs of vascular dementia. I'm living with this disease, and I have a good life.
Wonderful. Thank you. And True, how about you?
I live in Maine, which is a wonderful, gorgeous state. But where in the town that I live in are not, the physicians there are not as knowledgeable about what I'm going through, and which is Alzheimer's. And it's, that bugs me, but I don't need them either at this point. So I'm just floating along and listening and learning.
Okay, great. Thank you. True, how about you?
My full legal name is Truthful Loving Kindness. Current diagnosis is mild cognitive impairment with Lewy body and vascular symptoms. And I don't remember the rest of the stuff.
Thank you. And Karen, and we lovingly call her Creaky.
I'm Karen Creekmoore, and also known as Creaky. I've been living under the umbrella of dementia symptoms since 2013. My diagnosis has changed several times, but I am proud to be part of this organization and advocating for dementia.
Wonderful.
Corpus Christi, Texas.
Okay, great. Thanks. I think I'm going to go with Harry first and talk about your diagnosis and when it started to kind of shift and you found out all of a sudden you had Alzheimer's and then maybe some vascular. How did you deal with that? And how did you tell others if you did?
Well, people know me know I have a big mouth, and I like to talk. But when I was first diagnosed, I knew very little about dementia. Now my grandfather had he died of Alzheimer's, so of course I knew the late stages of it. And the day I was diagnosed, I put myself into the late stage, and I was scared to death. And at that time, there was no support groups around. The Alzheimer's Association had a bulletin board, but if you would post a question, it might go 2 or 3 days before you got a response. And that's why I got involved in the social media. And I found out that people living with this disease, they want to talk about it, but there's nobody to talk to, because everybody tries to hush it up, hide it, whatever. And that's why the memory cafes are so powerful and popular, because it's okay to sit down and say, I have dementia. Nobody judges you. Nobody tries to pamper you. They just accept you.
So Harry, when your diagnosis changed from Alzheimer's and then added in the vascular, did you tell people in your memory cafes and your family and friends of that change?
Yeah, now it's interesting. I was giving a talk, and there was several neurologists there. And after the talk, The one came up to me and says, Harry, he says, I know you were diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but he says, you should talk to your doctor because I see more signs of vascular in you than Alzheimer's. And I did. Now, you have to realize that I do have high blood pressure. I was having many strokes. So the symptoms were there, but you get hung up on, you have Alzheimer's, Harry, you forget everything, and that's not the way it is. And it's okay to have mixed dementia. That's normal.
Did he say what types of signs he was seeing in you? That he thought it might be more vascular?
He just says he was observing me, and he says that when I was speaking, I had good train of thoughts and things like that, but he picked up on some body language that I had. And I think people with vascular that get many strokes and stuff like that, their eyes are a little bit different, and people that know how to read that stuff, they can tell pretty well, the difference. And I was shocked when he said that. And when I went back to my doctor and I asked him about it, he agreed with me. But he said to me, does it matter? And I said, no, it doesn't matter. Dementia's dementia. And I'm not ashamed to have dementia. It's just I have a memory, a brain condition. Somebody that has cancer isn't ashamed they have cancer. Somebody has a heart condition isn't ashamed, and dementia is no difference.
Yeah, agree. I think it's interesting that he could observe some things. It's like, boy, that sounds like that would be a good training session, not only for physicians and healthcare, but for family. It's like, hello, we need to be talking about some of these things. Because I've never heard of somebody saying from observation with those types of subtleties that they picked something out like that.
I can tell you that when I told my family I had dementia, except for my daughter, my oldest daughter, they abandoned me. My brothers and sisters, and even my children abandoned me. I asked my brother about it one time, and he said, Harry, I wouldn't remember you the way you were. And, I wanted to smack him, because I could live 20 years from now. Does that mean you're not going to be at least my friend for the next 20 years?
So they kind of did what you did when you said you first got diagnosed. You got the diagnosis and then you envisioned the end stages.
Yeah.
And that's
exactly.
And that's what so many people do. I mean, you have lived a long time with this disease, and my mom lived 30 years, with this disease. And it wasn't until, really the very end when things significantly changed for her. And wasn't able to communicate, or people would say more end stages, probably her last 4 years of that. But, prior to that, 26 years, she could still be engaged. It might have changed in terms of how she engaged, but, and even at the end, she was still engaged. It was just even more subtle, and you had to be more still and pay more attention to pick up those communication signs, but they were still there. So I thank you, Harry, for sharing that. True, I'm going to go to you next, and because you've been living, with dementia symptoms, I think you said since 1999, and so that's quite a while. Going to be 20 years coming up next year for you. So, what an anniversary, huh?
It was 20 years last year.
Oh, that's right.
February of last year.
Yep. Yep.
hmm
There goes my math.
Well, I know that this one is a 0
Mm-hmm.
and 9 comes right before 0. I
Yep.
can't add or subtract really much, and I don't register numbers over 10,
Mm-hmm.
but I go a lot by what is the last number. I mean, I was very number oriented, you know, so I got to be able to do something. I go a lot by the last number.
Now, can you talk to us about, you know, your diagnosis and when it changed and how that impacted you and others?
My diagnosis process was really complicated because I've got other diseases stuffed in there. I got Lyme, Babesia, and Babesia attacks basically the brain. Lyme attacks the brain very often if you have it for very long. I had it for more than 30 years before they discovered it. So I had Lyme, Babesia, and Bartonella since 75 when I was cutting trail for the U.S. Forest Service. And it wasn't diagnosed until 2007. So in those years after my dementia symptoms started until we discovered I had Lyme, it was just all in an uproar because I had a lot of physical symptoms too. So what's caused by what wasn't clear at all. Then 2007, I got my Lyme diagnosis, started treatment, 5 years of treatment for the Lyme disease, and my physical symptoms started getting really improved dramatically, but the cognitive symptoms didn't. So that's when they said, well, you know, they did a bunch of other tests, and then they said, yeah, we probably got some dementia going alongside of the other stuff. Now I forget your question.
No, my question was in terms of the diagnosis changing and how you handled that. Did that impact how you looked at yourself?
Very much so, because I started advocacy projects in like 2013. And I got attacked a lot because I'm very high functioning. Not to brag, but I think this impacts it, that my IQ was still substantially above normal in 2013 when I'd been having a lot of decline for years and years. So that kind of a cushion, cognitive cushion, creates a different perspective on what your dementia is going to look like to others. And I lost the track of what your question was again. I'm sorry, that shows I'm having problems keeping track. I'm having problems understanding words. That's why when you said something a little bit ago, I repeated it to myself slow, and in order to understand what you were saying.
No, not a problem. So when your diagnosis changed, how did that make you feel inside?
Okay. It made me feel like a fake. I not only had I been saying I had dementia, but I'd been being attacked for not really having dementia, and I have no business talking about dementia and giving my perspective as a person with dementia when I don't have it. I had been getting attacked actually quite a lot. And so then going along and getting a change of diagnosis to mild cognitive impairment, it's like it reinforced all those attacks. Yep, I don't have any right to talk. I need to keep my mouth shut. I have no right to talk about my symptoms. I have no right to talk, to be part of groups. It's a scrambling of your whole world, and it's really pretty traumatic.
Yeah, I remember when they changed kind of categories from Alzheimer's to mild cognitive impairment, and a lot of people got hit with that change. And, you know, everyone, I remember just screaming, going, there's nothing mild about this. My symptoms haven't changed. You know, out of all the names they could pick, why did they have to put mild in there? You know, walk in my shoes type deal. And so I think part of the problem is, you know, as our bodies change is one thing with symptoms, because sometimes, you know, people will be diagnosed with Alzheimer's and then all of a sudden, you know what, this really seems to be more Lewy body, or maybe you have a little Parkinson's, or, you know, vascular, all of those types of things. And it's confusing because you know, from what I hear from all of you, and which makes sense, is you go through this settling in of acceptance of, okay, this is what I have. It's kind of like learning that you're adopted. Well, I was like, this is who I thought I was, and now I'm not, you know, and so you're struggling with it, and then the outside world can, you know, many people get in this attack mode of, you're not authentic, you've been lying to us, there's this distrust, you know, my husband or my wife doesn't act like that, thinking that everybody's the same. And, you know, as much as we say, when you've met one person with dementia, you've met one, just like every care partner is different as well. And so I think people need to understand the emotional devastation and confusion that can happen with that. And granted, I think most people want to know the truth, but yet there needs to be help in processing that. Or how do you even explain that to people? How do I explain it to myself? How do I keep an authentic voice and not feel like, gosh, people are going to think I was lying before? When, you know, if the doctors don't know, how the heck are you going to know? You know, this is supposed to be their expertise, but we don't look at it. We don't rationalize that, I think, to ourselves like that, because, you know, most of us, you know, take the blame, you know, on ourselves. Well, I should have known, or, you know, whatever. And you can't. This is a moving, and this is my perspective, but it's a moving diagnosis. And everybody who gets a diagnosis, no matter what it is going to react to it different, because everybody's body is different. Everybody has, you know, different genetics, different makeup, different support, different everything. And so, you know, but I think that's one of the things that has to be talked upon by the doctors when someone's diagnosed, that, you know, things might change. This is what I'm going to tell you today. This is our best guess. It's either that, or, you know, we'll perform a brain autopsy, but I think you still want to live, because I think you got a lot of life in you, you know. But I mean, that's really kind of the choice that it comes down to. But it's not talked about in that fashion. And so, you know, you kind of step back. I mean, if you get a diagnosis of heart disease, they don't all of a sudden say, oh, sorry, it really was your liver, you know. And that's kind of how I think that's sometimes how we look at processing it. And I think the same thing probably happens with cancer. The doctors say we got it all, though most of us know once it's in your body, it could creep up and show up in a different area at another time. It's not something that we want to focus on, because we want to look at life. But again, it's one of those, it's cellular things that can happen, and it might not. But I still believe the conversation, the educational conversation, needs to be there, that this is best guess. And as, you know, I just look at the 10 years I've been physically in this space now, how much things have changed, how much more communication there is. And yet, we're here and we need to be way up here. We still have a lot of growth. Karen, I'm going to go to you next, if you don't mind. In terms of, you had mentioned in your introduction that, you've kind of been a moving target, with diagnosis, and how have you dealt with that, and how has it made you feel?
Well, up to this point, I've dealt with it pretty well. I'm comfortable with the diagnosis of a type or symptom of dementia. Initially, in 2014, I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's without a PET scan. Of course, my dad died, and his sister, and then their mom and grandfather all passed away, Alzheimer's. And so I think just because I was on 8 psych drugs and I had this past history and I was pretty messed up, they stuck that label on me. So of course my instant thing was, my life is over with, I'm ready to go kill myself. And then I found dementia mentors, and I found people living with dementia in groups, social groups, living life in the moment, and good quality, productive life. And that's when I became an advocate. So the 9 months after I was diagnosed, they did do a PET scan, an amyloid PET scan, which showed 0 plaques or tangles. So they said, well, we're going to change you to unspecified symptoms of dementia. I said, okay, I'm kind of unspecified anyway. So again, that didn't change my advocacy. That didn't change what's going on with myself. Fast forward to last month, I did a 5-hour neuro psych evaluation, just so I could get help working on the areas of my brain with exercises that would help me on the deficits. They came back with a new diagnosis, and they said, well, there's no longer unspecified symptoms of dementia. The DSM-5 says it's now mild neurocognitive disorder. So that's what sent me in to what do I call myself now, that I'm in a advocate role as far as my community goes, representing persons living with dementia. And so it's semantics is all it is to me. What I'm hearing from my friends is semantics. I have brain disorder. I have dementia. Whatever the heck you want to call it, go ahead. But I still have a voice, and I will still have that voice. The biggest thing I think for myself, because I was diagnosed early, like quite a few of us, is the fact of, you don't look like you have it. You really don't. Why do you think you do? I forget. All of that kind of thing. And then because I'm like, you don't believe me? I'm telling you the truth. And for myself to try to convince them, well, why do I need to convince them? I know in my head what I'm going through. But the part about advocating in a dementia-friendly community is to let the community know that we're all different. I might be able to talk and might be able to walk and drive and, do some things, lots of things. But I have dementia, and for them also, they get a cookie sheet, rightfully so, because there's over 100 different types of dementia. So we all have different symptoms, and so it's, what my message is to them is to don't be offended if you talk too slow, and those of us that don't need to be talked real slow with, it's up to me to be able to say, I need you to pause. I need you to, and to let them know that it's okay and you're not going to hurt my feelings, So that's kind of, and also just medically, I was just in the doctor's office trying to change. I need a PCP that is constant. I have a college group, doctors medical team. So I see someone different every time. That is not working anymore for me because I have to give them my paper that tells them I have, dementia, talk slower, and they come in and pepper me. So I go in to try to get a geriatrician that will be my one and only, and they come in, well, you were diagnosed 7 years ago. You should have gotten a lot worse by now. This is a geriatrician. So anyway, there's a lot of education that needs to be going on, and I'm really patient in that area. It's just this changing of the diagnosis is what's messing, I think, a lot of people up. Thanks.
Yeah, it is confusing. Go ahead, True.
I think it's worth noting that even a lot of times the doctors get confused by how differently people can be, people's brain can be processing these changes. For me, one of the first areas that was hit was sound processing. And then some of the other things came along. Now sound processing for me is getting a lot worse quickly. And my uncle is now having the same problems. The latest tests say, no, it isn't that you can't hear, it's that you're not being able to process what you hear. And that apparently is not really a common area to be hit first. You find people that are hit first with processing of sight. You find people that are hit first with processing of speech. But not often do you find people that are hit first with processing of sound. It's just hard for me to explain to others because I think that it's one of the less common areas that are hit first.
Well, and I think that's a really good point. I just had somebody in my memory cafe, and this gets to the point of understanding the processing and how critical that is to this whole disease category of dementia. His wife, they were saying, was having difficulty swallowing, and so she needed crushed pills and mixed. And so of course then they were going to raise the fee, even though that's really common to crush pills and put them in something. And so they had a therapist come out, and she said, well, no, it's not that she can't swallow, it's that she doesn't remember how or to swallow. And that's a really big difference in terms of putting everything together. She's got the mechanical ability, but if the brain's not triggering that to do what it's supposed to do, that ain't gonna happen. And same with your sound, or same with somebody's speech. But people don't view it like that. It's like this all or nothing, and it's like, no, I'm kind of here in the middle, and and sometimes it might connect and sometimes it might not. And so don't call me fake or deceitful, because it's here. It's not me making these choices, in terms of are things going to connect in the brain, and how are they going to connect in the brain? And so I think that's a really big misconception that people don't truly understand. Even though we say this is a brain disease, people still don't understand kind of the firing of the neurons and the whole connection process. And again, one of you had mentioned about, the doctors are kind of surprised, because I think they take great pride when they feel like they've personally got to know somebody, and they think, okay, I got this down. And then it's like, well, you're not like that person at all. He's just, now I gotta learn this again, and kind of expand their knowledge. And so is wonderful it is for people to be, person-centered and relationship-based. That is one person. and it gives you an idea of a set of symptoms, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee by any, way, shape, or form that the next person is going to react in the same way to those set of symptoms under a specific category. And so I think that's, one of the reasons we're seeing more types of dementia popping up. I mean, most people thought dementia was just Alzheimer's, and I think they are starting to understand the Lewy body, the vascular, and the frontal temporal. Those are probably the most common that people know, yet they don't know the depths of the differences between them. So we have a long ways to go. And then we get in with the changing of the name because, well, some people don't like the word dementia or they don't like the word impairment. So instead of saying impaired, we're going to call it a disorder, and so it just gets into this whole semantic thing. And to me, as kind of an outsider looking in, I just want to scream at the top of my lungs saying, stop screwing with the words and let's just educate people on the variables here, and let's go forward. Karen, you look like you had a comment on that one.
I was just going to say, how am I supposed to remember which diagnosis I'm supposed to keep track of? I mean, 3 times, so anyway.
It is aggravating because, you participate in advocacy projects. They always do your introduction. Well, I had an introduction sheet right here and it's gone. I know I've got to say my name because it's a unique thing. And everybody thinks that I'm trying to hide my name. I've got to say this. I should say that. I should say that. And I remember 1 or 2 of them and everything else is gone.
It's frustrating. And yet, from the outside again, looking in, it's perfectly fine. Because when people are introducing themselves, I don't care who it is, everyone's looking in the rear view mirror afterwards going, I should have said this and I should have said that. And why didn't I say that? Even if they've got it written out and they've stated everything on there, it's like, oh, I forgot this, And so I think sometimes we as a society, we focus on doing the perfect thing too much instead of, Harry, we were talking before we started recording about just utilizing your authentic voice, and whatever comes out is what somebody out there needs to hear, and that's perfectly fine on that. So let's go to Anne. I didn't forget about you, but I wanted to kind of stay on track of where we were at. And how have you dealt with your diagnosis? How did you feel when you first got diagnosed, Anne?
Well, we think, first of all, Maine is not really a great place for physicians. So kind of go through the muck sometimes. Anyway, so I've been here 7 years in Maine, and it's a gorgeous place. I had a small bowel obstructure, and that probably what really screwed up what was going on in my head. It's still there, but learning a lot about that. And so they're not, even the physicians know zero about Alzheimer's. But it's okay because I've been doing this for 7 years. And so, it is what it is. And it's been a real interesting education for me. And I guess, I've got a great husband, and he's really, really smart, way up there. And so he is taking Mass General and what they have, and it's incredible what they have. And we've gone through a lot of things there, even some, equipment and stuff on the leading of what they're doing in mass. And so we've gone through a bunch of that. And it's interesting, but it is what it is. And I can't say, oh, well, gee, if I would just eat more cornflakes, you know, it's going to be better. I know it's not going to be that way. And I guess it's the best thing about what's happened to me is finding you guys. And that is what's getting me going. True knows that I know that. And so you got to go with it. And it's been quite an interesting ride.
Now, have you been diagnosed with Alzheimer's the whole time, Anne, or has your diagnosis changed at all?
Yeah. So I retired. We moved up to Maine, and I wound up with a SBO, a small bowel obscure, and that hit this. That's why I turned on the whole thing with my head. And Maine, it's a great state, but they don't have the physicians, they don't have the knowledge. And when this was all starting, and my husband has a really high IQ, which is nice. And so we learned that there's not anything here that was going to help. And so it was up to us. And so that's what, where we're at now. And I got to tell you that this, getting to know you guys has been the best thing. And it's fun to talk fun stuff and worry about things like driving and stuff like that. So I've adjusted to that. It is what it is, and I can't change what happened in my head. But my husband is fabulous, and so and we're still hacking around at possible things that might help with Alzheimer's, and and of course having it now for 7 years, I know what it's like. So
well, that's great. Now, you had mentioned, and some others had mentioned, that social connections and just being part of, a group like Dementia Chats, Dementia Mentors, Dementia Action Alliance, Dementia International, Action International, Facebook groups like Harry's, Forget Me Nots and Semantic groups, how important they are. And one of the things I've seen by talking with people throughout the world at all levels is, and we've talked about with COVID, how the isolation has impacted people. And yet I hear routinely from people that are living with dementias, like, welcome to our world. This is what we were dealing with when y'all walked away, when y'all got too scared. And so, knowing how to adapt to a different world is critical and can make or break how you adjust to a diagnosis or a changing diagnosis. Plus, I think one of the things that I appreciate, one of the reasons I started Dementia Chats in terms of trying to raise all your voices, is you guys are filled with so much knowledge that we need to hear, and why we haven't done a better job as a society of listening to what it is you can teach us, to me has been asinine. And granted, it's changing, but it still isn't where it needs to be. And I'll use the example of even memory cafes. There's, I think, over 800-900 of them that Dave has been tracking in the Memory Cafe directory. Out of that number, there's like 50 that have gone virtual. And I know they're not all listed there, but it's a great resource for people. But it just shows that even people who believe and know these haven't adjusted to help those who are supposed to be the main focus of these groups, you know, the families.
Yep.
And the people living with
Yes.
it. And so we got a ways to go, that's for sure. Harry, any comments that you have that you thought about that we haven't discussed regarding this topic of changing diagnosis?
Now you have to realize I was on a 2-hour webinar yesterday, and I'm talked out. You know? but I find it very interesting talking to the Italian people and then talking to a group like this, that the discussions are completely different. Okay, like when I'm talking to the Italians, they want to know what it's like. You know, they don't try to analyze me, they're trying to learn from me. And you don't find that here in the States because the experts are the ones in the medical field. But speaking for myself, I walked through the pits of dementia for so long, so many years. I know the horrors of dementia. I know what it's like. And if somebody tries to tell me what it's like, I can tell if they're phony or not. Like, I'm not above saying you have no idea what you're talking about. You don't know the fears we go through. You might have read a book about them, but you have not felt the emotions of them. And there's a big difference. And like yesterday, there was 250 people signed up to come on. Now, I don't know how many came on or not because there's no way of me knowing. But they all wanted to know. They're seeking knowledge, you know, and that's so refreshing. Now, when I was having my memory cafes, I have 6 different memory cafes, and we were getting like 40, 50 people at each one. Then we went virtual. That number dropped into below 10. And you get the same 5, 6, 7 people at each one. And they became a social gathering and not an informational, you know. And I spanked myself because I let it get out of my control. You know, that it is a social gathering, but we have to learn about this disease. And now I'm involved with the Lancaster General Hospital, and they get an average of 130 new patients every month diagnosed with dementia. Now, unfortunately, we lost contact with them because of the COVID. You know, I used to have so many talking events, but we no longer have them because of the COVID. And I'm really concerned how we're going to pick this up, how we're going to get back to where we were, because we were being so successful with dementia awareness that I'm afraid we're falling back into the stigmas, because honestly, people don't care. You know, they just don't care because they have other things on the mind.
Well, I think with COVID, what I saw as from a speaker standpoint, and I'm still seeing, is most people in healthcare don't have the bandwidth to coordinate virtual events. You know, it's not their comfort level, it's not their expertise, and the guidelines for COVID have been changing constantly. It's really difficult for them to do that. I think eventually it'll happen because there's a lot more conversion happening online. And I wanted to comment on your memory cafes going from kind of educational to social, and the decrease in people. A lot of it is because people aren't comfortable with technology, or they don't have the technology, is one. But two, Harry, I wouldn't beat myself up saying, why did I let this go? We're not being educational, because the information that's coming out in terms of the importance of that social gathering is huge. Massive, massive impact. And what I've also seen, because my memory cafes are pretty much strictly social. We don't have a program aspect to it, but we learn from each other's real life living with it. And I think most of you will agree, you know, through your diagnosis, not every day does dementia punch you in the face. You know, some days you have a really good days and you're like, okay, dementia's in the closet. Thanks for locking it up and let me have a really swell day. And we want to hear about those things too, because that lifts people up. And then when symptoms come out and people are struggling, you know, they'll talk about that. And I think they'll talk about it even more when they feel socially connected. Now, I might be wrong, or you might disagree with that. But I think through COVID, we're all kind of doing this dance. I do think that it is sad that a hospital system doesn't understand the elevated need for what you're doing right now, and hasn't put funding in there. But again, they got a lot on their plate. Go ahead.
They do understand, but there's not much they could do about it. Like the concerns I have, I know through LGH, they have the same concerns that they can't provide the services they once did. You know, now the virus will pass someday, you know, but we walk it through this. But they're thinking the same way I am. How are we going to pick up the pieces? You know, there's a lot of people being diagnosed with dementia. A lot of people. And right now we have a void. We set up a very good, here in Pennsylvania, we set up a very good support system that people can reach out and get the support they need. But that dried up.
Mm. And hopefully that'll adjust. Karen, anything that you want to add?
Yeah, back on the, I have a local memory cafe that I started back in November before the COVID happened. And there's only about 3 or 4 of us. It was just for people living with some form of dementia. And so there were 3 or 4 of us, and the COVID came and they offered to do an online thing recently. And I'm like, you know, well, these people aren't able to. One of them doesn't even have a computer. The other one has a care partner and does great one-on-one. And I was calling them and she was able to communicate with me and it was great. But people, you know, so this technology, I'm grateful that I'm able to do it right now. And I don't know where I'll be without it, because this is my only support with dementia. So, and real quickly on Anne's comment of her brilliant husband, Ross, I have learned a new term, and Guy and Hazel, you know, of course, she's a wife, of course. A new term is BUB, B-U-B, backup brain. And I learned that, I think it's DAI or something, coined their husband or something. Because for myself, it's hard for me to ask for help. I am desperate in need of help with organization, paperwork. But can you help me? No, but I'm going to get myself a BUB, a backup brain, you know, and it's a little more palatable for myself to bend down and say, I need help. So anyway, I just love that term, and it's exactly what it is. I just need some assistance. and I'm not married. So there you have it.
And anything that you want to add?
I was just thinking how comforting this is to listen to all of us and what, you know, what's on our minds, and it's so it's not so scary because we're all sort of in the same thing, and that's really helpful, you know.
Wonderful. True, how about you? Anything you want to say as we wrap up?
I was just thinking what a joy it is to see Anne.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you guys for being our experts and sharing your thoughts and your experiences. I learn something every time I do one of these with you guys, and I know our audience does as well. So to our audience, I hope you like, click, and share and spread these around. There's lots of them we've got listed on YouTube, and more people need to hear the true voice of those living with a diagnosis, and not be so scared to have a conversation about this topic, because there's plenty to learn no matter who you are, no matter what level you're at or what your IQ is. None of us have all the answers, and none of us probably ever will. And so just know that there's a lot to learn, and the lessons and things you will learn from dementia will enhance all of your life. I truly, truly do believe that. So again, thank you so much for taking the time with us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.